Welcome to the Heart of Advocacy, where we shine a spotlight on remarkable individuals committed to building a more equitable and just world. I'm not Ken or Doni, your usual hosts. I'm Luke W. Russell, a friend and lover of humans and former host of 2 podcasts. My expertise lies at the intersection of human connection and pursuing business objectives. I've had the opportunity to work with Ken and Doni over the past year and a half to discover and pursue how they wish to show up to their communities. They're with The Advocates, a law firm serving the Pacific Northwest. This is when they would usually be saying, "Join us as we explore the inspiring journeys of these heroes who uplift marginalized voices, serve their communities, and break down barriers to create a brighter future for everyone." I'll let you in on a little secret. If you ever want to see them squirm, try telling them that they're doing all of this and that they're heroes too. They'll probably say, "No, you are," and try to scuttle the conversation forward. I think this highlights the beauty of how they desire to show up in the community. What was fun about this interview is that I got to flip the tables and interview them. Personal injury law firms have a comically bad rap in society. They're labeled as ambulance chasers and greedy, and sure, there are some bad apples out there, but the truth is that this industry only exists because businesses, typically insurance companies, who say they'll cover people's costs when they're harmed, then refuse to pay people who have been harmed. You see, it's actually more profitable for these businesses to just not pay a lot of people who've been harmed and face the lawsuits where they'll have to pay some of the people. Because of the work Ken and Doni do, they're standing up for people who have faced devastating physical, emotional, and financial trauma. Day after day, the work Doni and Ken do is all in service of the individuals who have been harmed. And if you listen through this whole interview, you'll get to hear them talk about why they want to take their clients' cases to trial. I've worked with over 100 law firms and interacted with thousands of lawyers over the past decade. Most lawyers are, well, average. They get the job done well enough. And many lawyers are quick to recommend settling. This means everyone gets paid sooner, except it also usually means everyone gets paid less. And while the lawyer might be okay, it is the client who most often carries the weight of this. Okay, enough of me. Let's dive in and explore the journeys of Doni and Ken and how they found themselves where they are today.
I want to go back and I want you to kind of like take yourself, Doni, you're a little younger than Ken by a couple years at least. And I want to go back. Let's say we're like in sophomore, junior year of high school. You're at a point where you're doing maybe a few sports at any given time. Mm-hmm. You're super intense on the athletics and you kind of have a vision of where your future is going. And that's athletics, professional sports. If you could go back to that past self, what would she think of what you're doing today?
She would be surprised, but not overly so, I think. I would be surprised that I was not playing sports, but I would not be surprised that I was helping run a company because my dad owned a business my whole life. He owned a music store. I think back to when I was a lot younger than that, when I was in elementary school, and my play time was running a store or a bake sale or putting something together with giving my neighbors makeovers. We didn't know how to do makeup. We didn't know how to do hair, but Cicely, God bless her, would, come over and let us do her hair. So I think on the running the business side of things, I wouldn't be surprised. This specific industry, I don't think I would be surprised. Personal injury, I think, was a wild card for me.
Yeah. Ken, I want to go back. You flunked out of college, and as you shared it, you didn't have focus at the time. I'd love for you to go back to that younger self, and if he could see where you are today, what would he think of what you're doing?
Well, there's some parts that wouldn't be a surprise. Running a business, even practicing law, maybe a little bit. I mean, it wasn't the intent, but I don't think it would have been a surprise because there wasn't some massive plan. it would not have been a surprise that I went back and finished school. That was easy to foresee. Doing personal injury law, doing trials. I think the trial part was not shocking given the competitive part of it, but personal injury was something that I think I would have been, really? You're that guy? I mean, you're the TV dude? And I would have been, no, that's, yeah, it would have been very unlikely that I would believe that, and maybe disappointing.
Can you tell me more about that?
To that person, to that 19-year-old, the idea of doing personal injury law would have been something like, oh, you're doing divorce law or something. I mean, and I'm not putting down divorce lawyers either because I don't know it that well, but that lack of knowledge of not knowing what it's really about, that ignorance would have made it seem disappointing, when now looking back, I'm not disappointed at all. I wouldn't trade with anyone. I wish that 19-year-old knew what I knew now. Maybe there would have been more focus on school the first go round, and instead of just working on work instead of going to school.
And Ken, so growing up, I believe as you described it, you weren't very athletic, but you loved competition, just not the kind that required heart rate elevation.
Not unless you count skiing. I mean, skiing was very competitive, but
what were you doing that really fulfilled that competitive drive of yours in those early years?
So there was a lot of games, and on top of that, we played tennis almost every day that we could, and skied. I mean, but mostly it was friends who I'm still friends with getting together and playing games constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, in lieu of going to school.
So both of you grew up being told you should be a lawyer because of the way you would argue. Can you share a story of an argument you had in your early days, perhaps at home or school?
The first story that comes to mind is not an argument. It was convincing my dad to buy me a pair of sneakers. I think at like Big Five or something.
Yeah.
And the argument I made for why I should get this new pair of sneakers was that I really liked to finish things I started. And we had started trying on the shoes, and it was this really cool pair of running shoes. And I wasn't a runner, right? I played soccer and other sports, but I didn't run track. So I really didn't need, I mean, I needed a pair of running shoes, but like not totally.
Yeah.
And it got my dad. I said, Dad, you know, it's really important to me. We've been trying on shoes for the last 10 minutes. And if we walk out of here and I don't get a pair of running shoes, I'll feel like I didn't finish what I started, and we should just commit and get these shoes. I walked out with that pair of shoes.
Wow.
That's fantastic. What about you, Ken?
Wow. That's so you.
I knew how to play with the heartstrings, man.
I love this. Yeah.
There were times with my brother, who was in town last week, and we just reminisced about when we were growing up. One of the things he said about games was he hated playing games with me. He hates games to this day because it was so, I mean, if he got into an argument, he would always lose. When we got into trouble, or even when we got into trouble because of something I would do, then my parents would sit us down and have kind of a discussion about who did it.
Yeah.
And he would always be the one that gets punished. And so he remembers that. And so, I mean, besides, that kind of taught me a little bit about, okay, I'm pretty good at making an argument, and my brother needs therapy, but that was...
You cover any of his therapy
But it
bills?
was worth it because I won.
I should. I mean, I was probably not a great brother. Not probably. I wasn't a great brother. But, that's all right.
Yeah.
I am now.
Yeah. We all change with time. And speaking of change, Donnie, I'd you were on track to pursue a soccer career professionally. And can you go back to that time when you realized like you had to say goodbye to that dream?
It's interesting because I didn't know in the moment when I made the choice not to play in college that what it meant was I am now putting to bed that identity and the potential to pursue soccer professionally. Yeah, so I got hurt in my senior year of high school and had already planned to start playing at UW freshman year. I said, instead of getting surgery, why don't I just not play soccer anymore?
Wow.
And that was that. So the decision was so quick and what feels like thoughtless, but I think it ended up being the right choice for me to move forward with the career I have now and the life I have now. And I think I was ready for that next step without knowing it.
Yeah. Did you ever have to go through like a grieving process, maybe later to see, like even just processing that? Yeah.
I remember playing. I played club for a little bit my freshman year, and then I was like, I'm not into this. The people are not good enough. I don't want to play with them. It makes me upset. And then I really missed soccer. So my junior year, I joined a rec team with a couple of my friends, and that first game back afterwards, I just sobbed.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I cried because I realized how much I had missed it, or I was so upset at how poorly I played. I think it was probably a combination of both. But I was like inconsolable after that game back after a couple of years. So
yeah,
maybe that's how it came out.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, but I was curious, Donnie.
You're asking the wrong person.
If you could explain to the listeners who aren't familiar what that is.
There are dragons and a board, and I think you kill people or other dragons.
Evil.
Is that how Dungeons and Dragons works, Ken?
Part of it, yeah. I'm not going to tell Donnie she's wrong.
That's right.
Because winning arguments even over Dungeons and Dragons. Kid, I'd love for you to talk about your love of being a dungeon master and what that meant to you in your early years.
It is so nerdy. But it was a big part of when we started playing. Someone else took over that role, and I remember really loving the game. Because there was more rules that you can imagine, and I like rules. And it got more and more impressive. But the creativity, I remember we were exploring, our characters were exploring this place, and everybody was dead, and we go into the next room and everybody was dead, and we go into the next room and everybody's dead. And one of my friends said, "What did they all die from?" And I just said, "Boredom." And so it's like, okay, then you are going to do this from now on, was what the game master said. That was Dan. And so I did it from that point on. It's a place to have creative outlet, but also be able to control the world building, which is kind of what was fun.
Yeah, because you went from, because you were being a player who had a character you were controlling, but then every time you're playing D&D, you have somebody who's overseeing, facilitating, and that was when you took the leap and you're like, I'm ready to be the person, basically a miniature god of this world.
Yeah, and then we did that for 3 years. We we played a lot.
Isn't that like when you think about taking on like a case, like aren't you really going into a world and you have to like, you're telling a story. You're taking both, like if you're going to trial, you're taking both the judge, the defense, and the jurors on a whole journey that you kind of get a bit of that, like as a plaintiff's attorney, an opportunity to declare what this story is going to be in taking people on a character journey.
Yeah, I think there's a part of that. I mean, it's different in the fact that the story is already created. At least the bones of the facts are there. So you're not imagining it. It's more a matter of how do you share this story in a compelling way?
Yeah.
I mean, story, credibility, preparation. That's the thing we keep going over with our trial attorneys. Those three things are all you need, but the story has to be something that is compelling and believable. Even on small cases, it has to be something that you just can spend 2-3 minutes, 2 or 3 sentences even, and say, this is what this case is.
Yeah. Now, speaking of cases in the law firm, like, I'd love for you to both just maybe take a moment and just reflect on when you realized you wanted to co-create in the business space with each other, that you wanted to build it together. So you're both competitive. You have different histories with it, but like when did this, like, the combination of like the competition, the drive, the thrill, when did that chemistry become apparent?
I don't know that there was a single moment. I think it was, I always believed that it was important to have a partner on the journey, and hadn't found that person. And so it was kind of, we looking for that at the same time as, well, maybe it gets it, smart, competitive. I mean, sees things in the right way. And I think the place where it was sure was we spent, it was probably 2017, 2018. We spent about 4 months writing down what our core values was. It wasn't creating them. It was just just putting them on in writing. 5 paragraphs that were probably the single hardest project in writing that I've ever done.
Yeah.
And we worked on that together. And once it was done, I mean, the way we poured over every word and the way, I think that with very few exceptions, the values were identical.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, yeah, this is something we can build.
Yeah. What's it like hearing that?
It tracks.
Yeah.
For me, well, I mean, I think it continues to build. It's like there wasn't one moment.
Not there yet.
Actually, yeah, the moment hasn't happened yet. So, no, it was a few months into the job. I was a legal assistant, and we were small at the time. I think we had about 10 people, 2 attorneys plus Ken. And the firm was 2.5 years old. And I don't know if I was naive or overly ambitious, but I remember thinking we could be doing things a lot more efficiently if we added a person focused specifically on billing, I think it was. And so, I have my wine and my tiny apartment, and I have a yellow pad, and I'm just, jot down what I think a good, a more efficient operational flow could be. The next day, I bring it to our office manager, Jen, at the time. And Jen was really cool because she left space for people to rise up, which I don't know if many other people in her position, she had the option to become what I've become here. But she was really committed, and she helped grow the firm for the first couple of years. And I brought her, my chicken scratch and said, Jen, what do you think about this? And she said, well, it looks like it could work. Let's talk to Ken. And she got me in in an office with Ken, and and Ken said, let's test it out. Why not? Yeah, I love this. And I see Ken's eyes get even buggier. And now knowing him, I know what he was thinking, which is, wow, like, I love somebody that can come to me with ideas. Loves to test things out and try to get better, even if it means you might fail. So the fact that I was given this opportunity as someone fresh out of undergrad that knew nothing, but taken seriously, was when I knew this guy is special. This company is special. And then I remember telling my parents, sorry for rambling, but talking to my parents about it, and them reinforcing that, like that, Donnie, this is something really special.
Yeah.
This doesn't happen to everyone.
Yeah.
You know, don't take this opportunity for granted. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see your beauty in the story she just shared, Ken?
My beauty?
Yeah.
I remember that meeting. I
Yeah.
remember that. And I was really excited. I disagree that Jen could have filled this role. I mean, Jen was perfect for the role, the transitional role that she filled,
Mm-hmm.
but the values weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I think that's, I mean, well, we've said this a million times. Well, not a million times, but it's something that we've distilled is what is it that is important about business? And in the end, it's only two things. It's relationships and it's values. Your strategies, your tactics, your successes and failure, that comes and goes. But those two things are the only thing that matters. And they're really hard to build and really easy to burn.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier, you both kind of referenced the fact that you're, maybe wouldn't have expected to be in the personal injury space. Growing up, I would hear jokes like, what's a good lawyer? And the punchline would be one lying at the bottom of the ocean. Or, somebody would say something like, oh, liar, liars go to law school. In medical school, that was, so Ken, I'm curious for you, because you've been in this industry for a few decades. What's it like working in an industry where the general public vilifies you?
I think that it isn't as bad as it used to be to start off with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might challenge the premise of the question a bit because I don't think it is like it used to be. But I still think there is a bit of a stigma that comes with being a personal injury attorney, particularly one that advertises. We know that. We see it. It's interesting because we talked with Matt, and he had that same moment when you see the clients and you see the happiness and the value that you have created for the client. It's like, bring it on, challenge me, because we are on the right side of this. And even if people don't understand it, we understand it. And that's what matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Doni, what about for you? How has your, just in working here over the years, really shifted your view on what personal injury is? And also not just what it is, but why the lawyers who stand in this space are so critical to society.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I struggled with that stigma for a long time because I have a pretty big ego and I care about what people think about me too much. I used to tell people, I work in, the legal industry. Well, what type of law? PI. Oh, private investigation. That's so cool. And 50% of the time I wouldn't correct them. I would just, yeah it is. Now I would correct them every time. In fact, I would just say personal injury, probably not PI. But Ken and I talk about this a lot. We wish we weren't needed. But what I've learned is the reality of insurance greed. And that makes me so mad. So I think that fires me up and that makes me be proud to be in the space. And I have to agree with Ken. I mean, seeing clients recover because we helped them advocate for themselves to get the right care. That's so rewarding. Seeing a client get closure at the end of a 3-year painful, physically and emotionally and a financially painful journey, getting that hug at the end of a case. I mean, it sounds cliche, but that makes it all of the judgment worth it.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything cliche about that at all, because you're saying you spent all this time. It's what you it's why you lose sleep some nights, and why you go in and will work extra to do something, is because you believe what you're doing is right, and it helps people. And so when you get that payoff, it makes sense that like to actually get to see the appreciation and feel that and experience that with a client like that. I don't think there's anything cliche about that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's all that common, though. I mean, people say that a lot in what we do, but I mean, I've talked to lots of people who do what I do, and for many of the attorneys, it's about the money.
Yeah.
And it's how much are they going to make? This is can be a very profitable industry if you build it for that reason. I think there's also a group of people who are doing it for the right reasons, where the payoff isn't the success for the client, but the justice. We got the defendant. I mean, I'm thinking of some great trial lawyers where it isn't so much about the reward for the client, but it's about the kill.
Yeah.
And I think there's another part of it, which is about the individuals that you are helping. And I'm confident that that's where both of us approach this. That was part of that kind of value meshing. I mean, there is something fun about the game of building a company and doing things in a more efficient way. And yeah, all of that's cool. But the why you're doing it is, if it's not there, then you can't. It would be much harder to be partners. If that wasn't kind of in lockstep.
Yeah. There is, especially now, we live in a world where things are extremely polarized, and it's almost everybody who I don't like is terrible, evil, and bad. So I think particularly in 2024, when you're like, oh man, the greed of these insurance companies, just sounds like, well, of course that's what you'd say. Like that's almost like what you're indoctrinated to say because you're lawyers and you want the paycheck. So I'd just love for you to just speak to that a little bit of like, and maybe if you're open to it, even sharing an example of something that, with appropriate details that just highlights how you're like, this isn't the way insurance is supposed to be.
I don't think it's all insurance companies. But it's the ones that are successful, and success is put in quotation marks, because they're corporations. And I don't think it's even so much insurance companies per se as it is corporations. And the idea that the shareholders value to the shareholders is really the measure of success. And so when you're talking about an insurance company, it's either going to be raise premiums or deny claims. Those are the two ways to affect revenue. And so,
or be really, really good at marketing.
And they're good at that too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're hilarious. And so, but it's real because we watch as we're litigating a case and we're in court and we're getting closer and closer to trial. Particularly in Washington, there's continuances are almost always granted the first time. And
meaning a trial date is set and the defense asks for a continuance and the judge says, sure, we can push the trial out X number of months.
Right.
Yeah. So they get one of those and it's like, okay, so they still haven't offered any real value. Then there's another one that they ask for and they usually get the second one. And the third, it's usually getting a little harder. And by the time they finally ask and the judge says, no more, we're really going to try this case. And we're going, finally, we get to explain to a jury what's going on. And at that point, they finally offer up what they've had in reserve the whole time. And it's like, okay, now we will pay. And usually those numbers are 2.5 times what they were offering a week before that. And it's just crazy how much it jumps up. And that it keeps us out of trial a few times.
Yeah. And what's unfair is for the clients who can't wait.
Right.
And, typically those are the ones in the most pain or that, are most financially burdened by the accident are the ones that end up taking less, settling for less.
Yeah.
Because the insurance companies know that the more they delay, the higher the chances that the person just caves and asks for it to be over. So it's we say the 3Ds: deny, diminish, delay. That's kind of the tactic we've seen. But yeah, that's so frustrating when you fight for 3 years and you finally get to the doorstep and they double the offer. And you're like, why did you make our client, this is fair value, why did you make our client wait? Why did you put your insured at risk? Because you thought you could. So
right. And it's not evil. I mean, I think about the people who do this from the defense side. Their hands are just as tied. They have no authority to offer full value on these cases before the corporation gives them that authority. And the adjusters that are working for the insurance companies get no authority until there's a real threat. And so it's all systemic. It's all built to maximize shareholder value. And the problem is that the system works if folks don't try cases. And so we know that not all firms are going to do that, but we know that they track who does. And so it's like, okay, well, we can't. In a perfect world, we'd all get together and we'd say, we're not taking it anymore. We're going to try all these cases and we will make them change their behavior because it's outrageously expensive to defend a case before finally offering full value. But we can't convince everybody to do that. And so all we can do is convince ourselves that we have to do it.
Right.
I believe there's a great number of people that do what we do that really would say, I would try cases if I could, but they just won't let me.
Like the client won't?
They think they're getting full and fair value. And the problem is that it's hard to identify what that is if you haven't seen the results from what a trial gets you. And it's difficult to see it. I mean, it's okay. Well, you say, well, what are the medical bills? I mean, well, that's part of it, but it's like those medical bills could be really high, but that person could be totally fine. And their life is great. And it really wasn't that much grief. It's like maybe the amount above those medical bills isn't much more than maybe another 500,000 or so. But maybe they're crippled, or maybe they can't talk anymore, or something like that. Yeah. And the medical bills are 100,000. That case is worth many millions, but it's hard to see that when your whole job is just turning cases and settling them. And it's like, okay, what are the specials? And you've got 300 cases. This is just another case that has 50,000 in medical bills. It's a good one. Let's settle this one for 120 and call it good. I mean, they would still tell themselves the right story. We've even had attorneys that have come through here that have said, okay, I'm a trial lawyer. I want to go to trial. And then we find out they really don't. I mean, and so they don't make it.
Yeah.
Because trial doesn't necessarily guarantee more money, right? It could, it could
risk.
Also guarantee a goose egg.
I mean, we're not alone in this view.
Sure.
That trying cases is how you determine a value. That used to be the norm 25 years ago when I started doing this stuff. The way to find out what a case was worth was to ask a jury. And now it's gotten so much about statistics and
formulaic.
That you're not even negotiating with a person. You're negotiating with a computer program half the time with smaller cases. And it's like, no, that's not good enough anymore. I mean, we've gotten away from what used to make this special. And when you are dealing with volume, it's hard to look at a case as something unique. And so if you don't systematize the litigation part of it, you'll lose touch with what creates the value.
Yeah. So what you're saying is because like you have created systems in the firm to help the whole team be looking at to be like, how are we going to assess this value? in ways that you would suggest that maybe other attorneys aren't.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
It's the goal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a process that is ongoing, but I mean, we know that there is sometimes we know what we have, and it's the case only has value that we're going to be able to convince.
Right.
We know what the case is probably worth. We know that we're going to be able to convince the defense that that's what it's worth.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only thing we can do to help our clients is get it done fast.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like one of the only core values, well, the only core value that was added post core value creation was driven. And it's all about litigating cases. The first line is, we are competitors who love to win.
Lawyers who really care about their clients know who the lawyer is. They know the people who are working on the case. And yet there are people who go out to really big law firms and they'll leave and go over to other law firms because they're like, I never heard from my attorney. Mm-hmm. And what it sounds like you're saying here is like you don't, when you're approaching that risk of trial, and that means for the client, who's carrying this great risk of no recovery ever, then you're saying like, we can't really make that in a true client focused way if we weren't there the whole time.
Right.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. One thing I love about contingency is that it immediately and kind of automatically builds trust.
Contingency being like the
contingency
fee, you get
fee.
It if you win. Yeah.
Because it builds that trust right off the bat with the client.
Mm-hmm.
Our financial interests are aligned.
Yeah.
That's one of the things. I mean, of course, you have to keep that up. So you're starting, although I guess even before they hire us, right? Lawyers have a bad rap. People don't trust lawyers. So that's really where we're starting. Yeah. But then contingency fee contracts help us kind of get more, build a little bit more trust. And then, most of our cases are with us for over a year. It's really talking to the client throughout that year, 2 years, 3 years sometimes, and making sure they know we're here and listening. And, continuing to build that trust with them. The other reason I love contingency fees, I'm a little contingency nerd, is that it also provides access to justice, to recovery for people that can't afford to pay a lawyer. Yeah. And people that are living paycheck to paycheck are also entitled to being fairly compensated for what happened to them.
Right. Because you can get the best lawyer because you don't have to pay the highest dollar on the hour.
Right.
But you go out and you get a great team like you all. And now you all are like, all right, now we got to go bust our tails because the way you get paid is by doing really good work.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, but if it were about profit, the right move is, there's a reason why Walmart is so successful, is they sell a lot of products for a little bit of margin. And so there are many successful, in quotes, attorneys who do the same thing. They settle a lot of cases for certainly less than what those cases are worth, but they do it fast because time, if you can turn that same investment over and over and over again, that makes it very profitable for them to do that. And so, because as you're listening to us, you're going, well, why wouldn't every lawyer do that? And it's like, well, there's other measurements that go into that ultimate dollar value of a case. And part of it is how long it takes to get there. And so when you're talking about the time that it takes to get from when you start working with a client till that resolution, if that's 3 times as long as it would take to settle it for half as much, it's like, well, you get 50% more if you just settled cases faster. And so it's an easy trap to fall into. And then I think most people come at it with a good heart and they would say to themselves, but it's best for the client too. And so they convince
And that's for
them.
the client to decide.
And it really should be for the client to decide with all of the evidence.
With unbiased advice.
Right.
Right.
And so if you start with the idea of, we like trying cases, we want to do this badly, that's part of the reward for us, and we find attorneys who share that belief, then I think the attorneys are less likely to be biased when they're saying, yeah, you should settle this case because that gets it off my desk and I can put something else there.
Right, because you've created a team and a culture that wants to go to trial. So you settle when it's best for the client. But you're always like, what if I'm hearing you right? You're saying, we want to go to trial. We love going to trial as a team, as a company. We just know sometimes settling is actually the best thing. So if I'm hearing you right, I think you're saying that you believe you're less biased toward just settling because you love the whole process and it's about showing up to the client. And
yeah, in fact, we incentivize, right? Incentives change behavior.
Yeah.
And so we have built an incentive structure, with our attorneys that incentivizes going to trial.
How do you keep your eye on separating what's good for you and what's good for the client?
That's a good question. It immediately makes me think of our core values, which is we make business decisions as if the client were in the room. And so I think to check ourselves on some of the bigger decisions, that we repeat that. We say that phrase out loud. Would we be making this call on this case or a business decision, right? A marketing decision maybe, if our client was sitting right next to us?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then we should not make that decision.
That sometimes is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Because there's shortcuts all over the place. And sometimes the clients will say, yeah, of course you should do that. It's going to make things, and it's like, okay, great. Other times they'll say, yeah, but that one hurts me and maybe helps them, or that one hurts all of us and it helps you guys. And it's like, then we can't be thinking that way. We were in a group where they were saying, you could we charge a third and it goes to 40% if we're going to litigation, fairly standard. But they were saying, what's now fairly standard, you can charge 40 or 50% and make it even higher. And it's like, well, yeah, but we're doing all right charging what we are. So if we made that decision, people would still probably sign up. It wouldn't change probably the number of clients we have in any way, except for we would be transferring money from our client's pocket into our own.
For no reason. What makes me upset about that is typically prices increase when the supply does not meet the demand. Well, there is a surplus of personal injury lawyers. There is, truly. And so I think those clients, those injured parties, are not paying more for a better service or because they can't find an attorney. They don't know. They're not necessarily educated, and therefore they're going to pay more and they're going to get worse representation. And that really bothers me.
Yeah. If you want to make more money, settle your cases for more. Get more value for your clients.
Yeah.
Do it the
right way.
No. That's what the client sitting in the room would say to do.
Yeah. Talk to me about the game of building a law firm. You're both competitive. You both love to win. What's winning look like, and what costs are you willing to pay in order to achieve it?
Our privacy, apparently.
Yeah. I think that the game is what makes it interesting, what makes it fun. It is the competitive part of it. But what does winning look like? It is that client that gives you the hug. It is that, it's that adrenaline hit when you know that the reputation is out there, that you're doing things the right way. It's kind of that feeling of when the staff, I've had staff, you're a great male adult figure in my life. I mean, when you see that kind of stuff happen, that's winning. And so it doesn't all come just from the bottom line. Yeah. It's not just about the dollars at the end, because if it was, we're not very good at this game. I mean, it's more about what it is we're going for And it's, that client experience, the value we give for them, it's the reputation hit.
Yeah. For me, it's like winning is achieving the next like milestone. It could be getting, a newsworthy case, and that person hiring us, and that feeling like, wow, our reputation, this person could have hired anyone and they hired us. Like, that's a win. The game is an interesting way to put it. Because when I think about game, I obviously think about sports, and I'm like, okay, what put the quarter in for me for sports? And it was always being the underdog, right? It was I loved to be the underdog, because when you win, it feels that much better. And so I think the game here is, when I started at the firm 2014, we'd been around for 2 years. We were nothing, right? Like, sorry, Ken. But no one knew the advocates. And so I think I connected to that underdog story. And I was just talking to Ken the other day. Now we have almost 80 people. We're in, 3 markets. And I miss that kind of small firm feel.
Yeah.
Because we're still small, right?
Yeah.
Like, when you think about it, I mean, when you're in a city that has Microsoft and Amazon and Boeing, you're freaking tiny. But it can, after 12 years, and the growth we have had, you lose touch with that. And that underdog story is really what motivates me. And so that's why, like, when I, those little new moments, like we achieved the next level, that's what feels good to me and keeps me going.
Yeah, that growth, not growth in number of clients or money, but if that growth in what we're doing weren't available all the time, what is the next cool thing we're going to be working on?
Yeah, like a big trial win. I mean, that's something you can go home and brag about.
Yeah.
Right? We had a case in Spokane, a trial case, and it wasn't even personal injury. It was employment harassment case against the Department of Corrections in Spokane, a pretty conservative market. And we were representing a female prison guard who lasted a few days. And was harassed by her boss, sexually harassed. And we won that case. A jury sided with us and this woman, and validated that what happened to her was wrong. And I mean, it wasn't a crazy amount of money.
No, but it was a lot.
It
was hundreds of thousands for a few minute conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it was really, that felt incredible, because it's a story that I can be so proud of and share with everyone I know. Yeah. That's winning.
And just some of the few moments in that trial where, I mean, you just hear how the defense would say something a little bit off, and our trial lawyer, and that when it was Stephanie, would just come back over the top and just, I mean, it was like, oh, wrong person.
A paralegal that used to work here graduated from law school this past week, or I guess she finished her classes. She worked here for 2 years and then went to UW to get her JD, and she just finished. That's winning, right? Is also seeing people, people leaving this place, whether you're a client or an employee, better. And this being a positive, uplifting place.
Yeah.
That's the real win.
Yeah. I want to step into the future, and where you're kind of at that stage of life where you're really reflecting more. And I think it kind of hits people in different stages, but maybe it's 20, 30, 40 years ahead. But when you look at the life you've lived, what do you hope people say about the impact you had on them? And then also, what do you hope that people would say, like, the business impacted, or how the business impacted them? I'm just curious. I'd love to invite you to share both, like, the personal impact and what you hope from the business.
I want people, I guess personal impact comes to mind first. to feel seen when they're with me. And once they leave, to feel good about who they are, and then spread that goodness, wherever they go next. That's the impact. I mean, that's really kind of nuanced and, maybe too big of a thing to hope for. But that's the impact I would want to have on people, is to help them see their good and then feel good about that good and then spread that good. Yeah. I would like to, from a business impact, improve like the system. I think that is the impact we're going for. And by improve the system, I mean maybe eliminate the need for a system for personal injury lawyers, right? Like that's probably not going to happen. But that would be pretty cool. Or just to maybe scale it back a bit.
Ken, do you want to share personal impact you hope?
I'm just hoping that people will have been better for having been part of whatever I was doing. Mm-hmm. And from a business standpoint, even the employees that are just passing through that aren't sticking around, but they're going on to law school and graduating this year, I hope they look back and say their life was better for the 2 years that person spent here. I don't know who we're talking about.
Audrey.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Audrey. Okay. I mean, and I think that would be the case.
Yeah.
That they would see that, and that the clients that passed through our firm, hopefully just once each, look back and say, I'm better off having chosen them to help me than perhaps if I had done something else. And so I got lucky or whatever it was by picking them. And friends feeling the same way. It's like, okay, I got to spend time and I feel somehow enriched. I guess it's all about reputation. I think that's what I'm at an age where legacy is something I start to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so much about building something that is, big corporation. I don't care about that. I mean, if someone said, well, you could do this and you would maybe take advantage of your clients, but it's the only way to stay in business, it's like, let's close.
Yeah.
We don't need the money that bad.
So we're at the final question, and this show is all about people who are advocating and making a difference. And as you know, the question goes as, who do you think doesn't get enough credit in our communities for the work and change they fight for? And before I let you two answer that, I do share your view that there are a lot of attorneys who don't care that much. They care to a degree, but it might be more in it for the money or this or that. But there's always bad apples in any industry. So I don't think that's the standard, but I think as personal injury attorneys, because there's stigma and because people think like when somebody gets a big lawsuit victory is, oh, look, now the person's probably just going to be off on a beach sipping margaritas and having fun. They don't get what it is that you all do as a business, as a firm. They don't, and while I don't, like, I just think it's really important to recognize that if you didn't show up and do these fights, if you weren't willing to take a person's case all the way to trial, knowing that you might not get paid, other people wouldn't get anything from the insurance companies. We know that, and if we want to go back to the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit in the 90s, she just wanted 10 grand and McDonald's wouldn't give her that. So it's like, this has been a long running thing where companies know they can deny, diminish and delay. And so I just think there's a really beautiful thing that you, like, as a profession, as an organization, what you do is so valuable in the world. And yes, you're for profit, but if you weren't doing it, and if you weren't doing it with so much care for the clients, I think personal injury lawyers who are client focused don't get enough appreciation. So I want to say that as your interviewer. And now I'd love for you two to share just, when you look out in the community and see people who are fighting for change, who do you think doesn't get enough credit?
So I'm not going to call out a specific organization, but what comes to mind is the people answering the phone, suicide helplines, that the person on the other side that's probably not getting paid that much money and probably didn't get that much training, but cares enough in the cause, because I think that's pretty cause-driven work, to answer the phone and be there for that person in distress. Or people going through domestic violence, having a place to call and that person being on the other side of the line to get them to the next step. And that person answering the phone doesn't get the credit that maybe the attorney that helps that individual out of a situation gets at the end of the day. And they're really the ones that helped make it happen.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ken?
While we've been doing this podcast and doing a lot of the outreach that we've been trying to do, we've seen so much, and I'm just constantly overwhelmed with awe at the people that are out there just doing it for no reason other than to help.
Yeah.
It still surprises me that people, even as divided a world as we are, that people still are willing to do that. For a single organization, I think underappreciated, maybe even sometimes put down, are the caregivers at VA hospitals. And what I've seen is, we were talking with a doctor and they were describing how amazing their work is. And it's like, well, you could go to somewhere else or just go to a VA hospital and they do a surgery too. And it's like, oh, don't just say that it was the implication that by paying a lot of money, you're getting better service. And I think about the caregivers at these hospitals who are doing it for no reason other than to care for people that really need it. And it's not just the doctors, it's the people that, the staff that are working there. They're not getting paid very well. And the service I've seen at these hospitals has been outstanding.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you,
Thank
Luke.
you, Luke. We hope you enjoyed today's stories and join us again at The Heart of Advocacy.
This episode was edited by Kendall Perkinson and mastered by Guido Bertolini. Produced by Deanna Fong and Taylor DeLine. Storyboard and podcast development by Luke Russell.
Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at We Are Advocates. As we wrap up, we'd like to express our heartfelt thanks to you, our listeners, for your continued support and engagement. I'm Doni.
And I'm Ken.
Together, we are all working to make a world more equitable and just. You've been listening to The Heart of Advocacy.
See you next time.